I just watched Amsterdam last night, and I'm having a really tough time thinking about where I place this movie critically. I'll delve into why that is later in my review, but without any further ado, let's talk about the most star-studded film we have gotten in a long time. Here is my spoiler-free review for Amsterdam. Let's start with the things that I loved about Amsterdam, which there are surprisingly plenty of. The first thing I loved about Amsterdam is how beautiful this movie is to look at. Amsterdam is easily one of the best looking movies of the year so far, and there is some very decent competition in that category. But what I love about Amsterdam is how vibrant it looks and how it makes the most out of its time period. This movie looks beautiful and it honestly perfectly fits in with the fall aesthetic we are experiencing right now, and this makes the movie all the more immersive. The camera work is also very solid, not perfect but overall good. The next thing I loved about this movie is the performances, and this really shouldn't be a surprise considering how stacked the cast is. Amsterdam has some really big names, and they all deliver. We get to see Anya Taylor-Joy in a completely new light, and Christian Bale stands out the most, which is expected given that he's the main character, and on top of that he's just a very talented actor. The rest of the cast is spectacular as well, but that's kind of expected given their reputations. My favorite performance here was De Niro, and that's probably heavily biased because of how much I liked his character and how much I like him as an actor, but I love the cast in this movie overall, and they all do a great job. I don't see any Oscar winners here, but the performances are good and that's probably an expectation from this level of a cast. The final positive I will say about Amsterdam is that it's funny, and it finds a way to integrate its comedy through its editing, which I find super unique and charming. There's also some nice running gags and funny lines that I liked. I wouldn't say this is the funniest movie I've seen all year, but it definitely has its moments. Chris Rock is also hilarious in this movie, and I'm happy to see him in this film, especially after all that's happened this year. But overall, this movie has some funny gags that I really enjoyed. Now let's get to the much more interesting side of Amsterdam, and those are my complaints. I think Amsterdam is, from a technical perspective, a great movie, but the plot has some serious issues. And that leads us to the first problem, and that is the fact that Amsterdam is a pretty convoluted movie. There are plenty of plot lines that seem unnecessary, and they seem to add nothing to the narrative. There are also long scenes with the characters talking, which, don't get me wrong, can be immersive, but most of the time it just comes off as the characters rambling. I also really wish the movie tried to establish the stakes and specify more things within its plot, because there are plenty of times where it feels easy to get lost in terms of the significance of things. I feel like Amsterdam could have shortened a lot of the dialogue-heavy scenes to focus more on the plot at hand, and they could have established why exactly the audience should care. It's because of this lack of why we should care and further tackling of human emotion that Amsterdam feels pretty meaningless to watch. There were moments for this movie where you could take me out of the theater, and I wouldn't be bothered to want to learn how the story unfolds. Also, the movie is based on a true story, and part of the movie is true historically, but the overwhelming bulk of the movie is fiction. And given that, they could have had a lot more fun with it, and they could have elaborated a lot more on certain plot lines and sections. Overall, it feels like Amsterdam just tries to do way too much for its own good, and it gets to the point where the story feels like an afterthought. The next problem with Amsterdam is that it's a bit predictable. Now, I wouldn't say it's overly obvious, but it feels like Amsterdam thinks it's a lot more clever than it actually is. The film gets to a point where it's pretty obvious where the story is going, and then they have flashbacks where it spells out exactly what happened, which feels completely unnecessary and kind of condescending. The ending of this movie also further illuminates how unnecessary some of the earlier plotlines were, because they really amount to nothing. The next complaint that I have with this movie that I kind of touched on before is the pacing. This movie tends to take a lot of time in certain sections, then speed through other parts, and I think this leads to a lot of confusion because aspects of the story that are not meant to be super important end up becoming further emphasized through longer scenes. Again, I think Amsterdam should have slowed itself down in certain areas and sped itself up in others to drag the focus to the plot rather than the side stories. The last complaint I will say about Amsterdam is that it feels like it gives us nothing new. The movie looks beautiful, but it doesn't seem to have that X factor that other movies have, and this goes back to the aspect of why we care. The movie has generic messages, and there's no real new ideas or themes going on here. Contrast this to the other great movies of the year so far, like Nope and Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it becomes very obvious how lacking in fresh ideas Amsterdam really is. And I'm not just saying this because Amsterdam is more of a historical piece and those other two movies are sci-fi. I'm saying this because those other movies have given us fresh themes and messages to ponder that we had not seen in film before. Amsterdam just feels generic in terms of its motifs, themes, and ideas, and this drags the film down substantially. Okay, let's move on to my rating. Amsterdam is a very beautiful and charming movie with its star-studded cast and color scheme that is meant for a fall release. But past its superficial beauty, Amsterdam is a really hollow movie. The film suffers from giving us nothing new, and the plot feels lazily handled at times. Before I give my own rating, I will say that I think most of the review sites are being a bit harsh with this film. It's not as terrible as their scores suggest, and the movie has some very good things going for it from a technical side. It's just the plot and the story that seem to be the main issue. There also is another issue with David O. Russell and his behavior that might be leading to the ratings being so low, but I'm going to separate the art from the artist here, even though David Russell is a complete piece of shit. But with that said, I'm personally going to give Amsterdam a 2.5 out of 4. It's not bad, but the movie feels like it could have been refined to be so much better than what the final product comes out to be. I wish they focused a lot more on the main plot at hand, instead of making the story much more complicated than it needed to be. But the movie's not horrible. Now, is it worth your money? In my opinion, probably not. The movie is visually extremely pleasing, but it's just boring. This might be just a personal taste issue, but I think I speak for the most of us who have seen it when I say this movie is boring. Also, considering the other things that the O. Russell has been rustling, it's probably a better idea to not support this guy. But there you have it, my review for Amsterdam. A star-studded mess. Guys, that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know your thoughts over Amsterdam in the comments below. If you have seen this movie, I would love to hear what you guys think about it, and if you haven't, please let me know if you plan on watching it. Also guys, I'm a small channel, so all the love and support you guys provide really means a lot to me. And as always, if you made it this far, thank you, I love you, and I genuinely hope that you have a great rest of your day.